What if the object streaking silently through our skies is not just a comet, not just a wanderer of ice and dust, but a message, an omen written in fragments? What if 3I/Atlas is not born from the calm and predictable cradle of the solar system, but torn from a world that no longer exists, shattered in silence, scattered across eternity? Could the light we see glinting on its fractured body be the last echo of an alien planet's death? And if so, what does it mean for us, watching from below, bound to our fragile Earth? It began quietly, like all cosmic mysteries do. Astronomers first noticed it as a faint smudge against the endless dark, a signature of motion not tied to our sun's family. Its trajectory was wrong, its speed too swift, its angle cutting across our system like a trespasser, rather than a child returning home. 3I/Atlas did not belong here. It carried with it the chill of interstellar space, the silence of a journey so long that even time itself seemed to forget where it had come from. And yet, in its faint shimmer, in its fragile disintegration, a question emerged. Could this be a shard of a world broken long before our own was born? Imagine, for a moment, standing beneath a night sky unbroken by city lights, watching a streak of light dissolve into fragments. To the naked eye, it might look no different than countless comets before it. But hidden within its chemistry, within its delicate, crumbling body, is a story that challenges everything we believe about planets, civilizations, and the violent rhythm of creation. Scientists measured its faint glow, its composition, the dust it shed like the remnants of old skin. Unlike comets we know, its fragility suggested it was not whole, not steady, a piece already weakened by journeys and collisions we cannot yet trace. It seemed less a body of its own, and more a survivor of something greater, now reduced to ash. What does it mean when fragments fall into our vision? Humanity has always feared the broken pieces of heaven. Ancient peoples looked up at falling stars and imagined omens of death, gods tearing apart the sky to send down warnings. And here we stand, centuries later, gazing at a fragment not of myth, but of astrophysics. And yet the feeling is eerily the same. Something in us recoils at the thought of worlds that could die, planets that could be torn apart, civilizations ground into dust, so fine it drifts for eons. Is this how the universe whispers its darkest truths, through debris disguised as beauty? Astronomy teaches us that destruction is not an anomaly, but a law. Planets do not always endure. Their fates are written in collisions, in the restless pull of gravity, in the violence of stars. Our own moon was likely born from such a cataclysm, the result of Earth colliding with a world the size of Mars billions of years ago. That cosmic violence shaped the tides, the nights, even the story of life itself. And so, when we look at 3I/Atlas, fragile and shimmering, we are reminded that behind the calm face of the cosmos lies a history soaked in shattering. Perhaps this fragment is evidence, physical proof, of that endless destruction, a shard that has carried its scar across the stars. But if it is a shard, then what of the world it once belonged to? Was there once a planet circling a foreign sun, oceans glittering beneath strange skies, mountains rising sharp against alien horizons? Did winds once carve valleys into its stone? Did rivers once braid themselves through soil rich with promise? Or was it a barren place, silent and cold, torn apart before life could ever breathe upon it? We do not know. We may never know. And yet, the imagination cannot help but ask, what if cities once stood there, lights flickering in patterns across continents, minds looking upward with the same questions we now carry? And what if those minds perished, erased not by war or famine, but by the merciless physics of a shattered world? 3I/Atlas forces us into uncomfortable territory, the boundary between science and myth, fact and speculation. Astronomers can calculate its orbit, trace its path, even predict its disintegration. But numbers cannot answer the deeper question. Is it a tombstone, drifting endlessly for a civilization long gone? In its silence, it asks us to confront our own fragility. For are we not too bound to a planet, dependent on its balance, its atmosphere, its fragile shield against cosmic indifference? If Earth were broken, would we not too be reduced to fragments, perhaps one day drifting into the eyes of another species in a distant corner of the galaxy, leaving them to wonder if our shards were all that remained? There is something haunting in the way 3I/Atlas fell apart. Unlike other comets, which sometimes flare but endure, this visitor disintegrated almost completely under the gaze of our telescopes, as though it could not bear the heat of our sun, as though the memory of its parent world dissolved with it. It came, it shimmered, and it died before us. How poetic that its life in our awareness mirrored its fate, fleeting, fragile, vanishing into dust. Yet even in death, it left us something. A question, a mirror, a fragment of reflection about what it means for worlds to break. And so, we begin our journey not with answers, but with unease. What is the shattered world theory? If not an invitation to peer into the graves of planets, what is 3I/Atlas, if not a symbol of survival and erasure at once? The cosmos is littered with fragments, but rarely do we get to see them cross our skies, glowing like ghostly lanterns, reminding us that permanence is an illusion. Perhaps, in truth, every comet we see is a warning, a shard from a body that once thought itself eternal, now reduced to a streak of light. Perhaps we too will one day join that silent procession of dust. Our Earth shattered, our memory scattered, our story rewritten as debris. We do not know the truth of 3I/Atlas. But the very fact that we ask such questions reveals something about ourselves. We are a species haunted by fragility, drawn to the edges of mystery, desperate to find meaning in the silence of space. We look at a fragment and see not just rock, but history. Not just dust, but memory. And in that act of projection, we reveal the secret we try so hard to ignore. That one day we too will be fragments drifting in someone else's sky. As the first light of dawn pushes against the night, telescopes still scan the heavens, searching for the next traveler, the next shard, the next omen. For 3I/Atlas is gone, but the question it left behind remains, pressing against the human spirit like a weight. Is it possible that the universe carries the ruins of civilizations in silence, scattering them like ashes across the dark? And if so, what will be left of us? They called it fragile, and indeed, everything about 3I/Atlas suggested weakness. But what does fragility mean when measured on cosmic scales? A comet crumbling before the sun's heat, a shard breaking into dust across millions of miles. These are not signs of failure. They are stories written in matter, silent records etched in chemistry, whispering of origins far older than our Earth itself. To understand the anatomy of this shard is to hold, briefly, the body of a ghost, a fragment that once belonged to a greater whole. When astronomers studied 3I/Atlas, they did not see a monolithic survivor of interstellar space. They saw disintegration. It broke apart in waves, fragment by fragment, as though memory itself could not hold. Some suggested it was simply fragile ice, volatile materials shedding under the sudden blaze of our sun. Others wondered if it had been weakened long before, scarred in collisions, cracked in silence, wandering across the dark for millions of years. Every observation was less like studying a living body, and more like sifting through bones scattered on a desert floor. The question lingered. What had this shard once been? A comet is not just a rock, it is a time capsule. Inside its fragile shell are frozen volatiles, water, methane, ammonia, organics, that condense in the cold womb of stellar nurseries. These ices are older than planets, older even than stars themselves. They are the raw ingredients from which worlds are built. To watch 3I/Atlas disintegrate was to watch the library of a world collapse. Each particle of dust carried a signature, a chemical echo, a tiny record of environments lost to time. Yet, even as instruments tried to capture these traces, most of them drifted away, scattered into silence, irretrievable. Is that not what civilizations do too? We are built from fragile ingredients, histories frozen into artifacts, words etched into fragile pages. And when destruction comes, so much of what we are dissolves. Libraries burn, cities crumble, languages vanish. Only fragments survive, often too small to tell the full story. Looking at 3I/Atlas, breaking apart before us, is like holding a ruined manuscript. Tantalizing, incomplete, filled with missing pages that once spoke of an entire world. What if this shard is not just a comet, but a metaphor for every civilization, every memory, every fragile archive we will ever lose? Scientists tried to measure its brightness, its surface reflectivity, its albedo. They found that it glowed faintly, shedding light more from the dust released than from the body itself. Like a dying ember, its illumination was not its own, but a byproduct of disintegration. It was not a lantern, it was a crumbling ash cloud, burning briefly before fading forever. If one were to imagine a civilization's ruins adrift in space, would it not look the same? A once solid structure reduced to fragments, glowing faintly as it fell apart, remembered not for what it was, but for the dust it left behind. We often think of space as eternal, of matter as indestructible. Yet the anatomy of 3I/Atlas reminds us that impermanence rules everything. Its core was not solid iron, not the unyielding rock of an asteroid, but fragile dust held together by the weakest of bonds. Cohesion was temporary. Time was the enemy. In a universe where stars burn out and galaxies fade, why should a shard last forever? Its fragility is not a flaw. It is the natural state of things. To study it is to study our own future, when the bonds that hold Earth together will one day fail, and our fragments will wander into another system, to be misread, misunderstood, or ignored. But what lies inside such a shard? Imagine cutting through its brittle surface, layer by layer. The outer shell, scorched and darkened by cosmic rays, tells of millions of years exposed to interstellar emptiness. Beneath it, ices preserve chemical secrets, molecules forged in the collapse of a star-forming cloud. Deeper still, there may be minerals, silicates, traces of metals, ingredients of planets, perhaps even seeds of life. Every grain of dust is a letter in a language we do not yet read. And yet, as 3I/Atlas disintegrated, this library scattered before we could study it. The pages turned to ash before we could glimpse the story. It is tempting to imagine that the shard carries more than chemistry, that somewhere within its fractured body lies a relic of civilization, a crafted alloy mistaken for mineral, a fragment of architecture disguised as stone. Our minds leap to these possibilities because they reflect our fears, that destruction is not just natural, but cultural, that even intelligence cannot save a world from shattering. Though the evidence leans toward ice and dust, the imagination insists on something more. For what is science without imagination? Without it, we would not even ask the question that gives the shattered world theory its power. What if? The anatomy of 3I/Atlas is also an anatomy of silence. It arrived without sound, without signal, without intention. And yet, in that silence, it spoke louder than any transmission. It reminded us that objects wander through interstellar space, not as travelers with purpose, but as survivors of violence. Like bones cast into the desert, they do not move to tell a story. They move because they were thrown, broken by forces they could not resist. To study such fragments is not to find meaning they intended, but to project our own meaning upon them. And perhaps that is what humans do best: find stories in silence. Its disintegration before our telescopes was not a failure. It was a revelation. In breaking apart, it revealed its structure. It told us that fragility is the rule, not the exception. It showed us that even across the gulfs of space, matter remembers the violence of its birth. And in its final collapse, it left us with a haunting mirror, that everything we build, everything we are, is built on bonds just as fragile. Our civilizations may feel solid, our cities eternal, our nations unshakable, but like a comet, we are held together by delicate ties. And when they fail, we too will scatter into fragments, leaving only dust to catch the light. To call it anatomy is misleading, perhaps, because anatomy suggests something alive, and yet, in a way, 3I/Atlas was alive. Alive with memory, alive with motion, alive with the weight of time. Its body was fragile, but in that fragility lay its truth. To look upon it was to see not just an object, but a process. Not just a fragment, but an echo. And echoes, like ghosts, remind us not of presence, but of loss. As the dust of 3I/Atlas spread into the void, its fragments joined the endless cloud of interstellar debris, a sea of forgotten shards, drifting forever. Somewhere among those fragments may lie the remnants of other broken worlds, other civilizations lost to time. We will never know their names, never know their stories, never rebuild their ruins. But in the fragile body of a single shard, we glimpse the truth, that the universe is a graveyard and we are walking among its tombstones. What if creation itself is nothing more than destruction in disguise? What if every planet we see, every moon, every star, is not the product of peace, but of violence. We speak of the cosmos as though it were serene, glittering stars, swirling galaxies, graceful orbits. But beneath that calm surface lies a history of collisions so vast, so brutal, that entire worlds are shattered in silence. And perhaps, in the anatomy of a single shard like 3I/Atlas, we glimpse the truth, that nothing exists without breaking something else apart. The story of our own Earth is proof enough. Long before humanity, before oceans, before the green breath of forests, this planet was broken and remade. The moon we look upon each night is a scar, the child of cataclysm. A world the size of Mars collided with Earth billions of years ago, releasing a firestorm that melted crust, boiled oceans, and hurled fragments into orbit. From those fragments, gravity gathered a companion. Every tide, every eclipse, every shimmering reflection of moonlight across water is a reminder that we are born of violence. The moon is not a distant neighbor. It is a monument to destruction, a relic of survival. If this is how our story begins, why should others be different? Imagine a planet orbiting another star, its surface calm and thriving, until gravity pulls a rogue world into its path. Imagine oceans rising in walls of fire as the crust is ripped open, continents melting in a storm of magma, atmospheres blasted away. What would remain? Shards, fragments, dust thrown into interstellar space, wandering forever. Some of those fragments might look like 3I/Atlas, fragile, unstable, carrying the memory of annihilation. Others might be unrecognizable, reduced to invisible grains adrift in darkness. And perhaps, just perhaps, some of those fragments carry more than rock. They carry the ruins of life. The physics of violence is simple, and yet its consequences are endless. Gravity draws masses together. Velocity ensures that meetings are not gentle. When two worlds collide, the energy released surpasses anything we can imagine. Billions of atomic bombs detonated all at once. Mountains vaporize, oceans boil, atmospheres strip away. In that instant, creation and destruction blur. For though the world dies, new worlds may be born. The moon rose from Earth's wound. Rings around planets may be the cemeteries of ancient moons, ground into dust by tidal forces. Even the asteroids between Mars and Jupiter are not primordial. They are the remains of a planet that never formed, torn apart before it could breathe. Violence is not the exception. It is the law. Look at Saturn's rings, shimmering like a celestial crown. Beautiful, yes, but also tragic. Each icy particle is a fragment of a moon destroyed, a body ripped apart by the giant planet's relentless gravity. Beauty is the mask destruction wears. Look at Jupiter, king of storms. Its mass protects Earth from countless comets, yet its protection is brutality. It devours wanderers, pulling them into its stormy heart, tearing them apart until nothing remains. In every direction, the lesson is the same. To create, the cosmos must first destroy. And so, we return to 3I/Atlas. Its fragility is not surprising, it is expected. It is the rule. What seems extraordinary is not that it disintegrated, but that it survived at all. How many collisions did it endure before it was cast into interstellar space? How many scars did it carry, invisible to us? We saw only the final chapter, the collapse under our sun. But the longer story is hidden. A history of trauma written in stone and ice. Its path across the stars was not voluntary. It was thrown, hurled by forces greater than itself, born in violence and condemned to wander. Does that not mirror us too? We did not choose this planet. We are here because collisions, destructions, and accidents gave us a home. We are children of violence, pretending to be separate from it, the shattered world. Theory does not ask us to imagine an extraordinary event. It asks us to accept the ordinary truth. Worlds break. The Milky Way is not a calm sea of planets and stars. It is a battlefield. For every stable orbit we see, there are countless fragments of worlds that did not endure. Some lie buried in asteroid belts, some scattered as dust in rings, some, like 3I/Atlas, wander across the abyss. If life once arose on those worlds, if civilizations once thrived, then the cosmos itself has erased them, grinding their histories into silence. And what is silence, if not the loudest voice the universe has? Consider the paradox. Destruction creates the possibility of life. Earth's collision gave us the moon, whose tides may have helped stir the chemistry of oceans into biology. Without that cataclysm, perhaps we would not be here at all. Violence is not only an end, it is a beginning, and yet, beginnings carry their own endings within them. Just as Earth was born in fire, so too may it end in fire, struck by another wandering shard, or swallowed by the expanding sun. Fragility is not weakness, it is destiny. It is the universal law written into every planet, every star, every life. We often ask, could there be other civilizations among the stars? But perhaps the better question is, how many have been destroyed before they could speak? How many worlds reached their flourishing, only to be shattered in silence? For every Earth that survives, there may be 1,000 that died. Their fragments drift still, unrecognizable, invisible to us. And perhaps, once in a rare while, one fragment crosses our sky and we mistake it for a comet. Perhaps 3I/Atlas was one of them. If so, then the stars above us are not empty. They are haunted. Violence is creation's shadow, and no world escapes it. To know the anatomy of a shard is to know the fate of planets. To see a fragment disintegrate is to glimpse our own future. Earth, too, will one day be broken, whether by collision, by stellar death, or by the long entropy of the cosmos. Our world will shatter. Our oceans will dry, our continents will burn, and fragments of us will wander the dark. Perhaps one day, billions of years from now, another civilization will look at our shards, drifting through their sky, and wonder, what world was this? Who lived there? What was lost? This is the violence of creation. It is not a question of if, but of when. The cosmos has no mercy, no pause, no forgiveness. It builds by breaking. It remembers by erasing. It gives by taking away. And yet, in that mercilessness, there is a strange beauty. For even in destruction, something endures. Fragments survive. Dust drifts. Shards tell stories, if only we dare to listen. And in their silence, we find the most unsettling truth of all, that to be alive, to exist at all, is to stand on the thin edge of destruction, waiting for the inevitable fracture. And so, as 3I/Atlas dissolved before us, we were not watching a comet die. We were watching the truth of creation itself. We were watching our own story, played out in miniature. We were watching the violence that made us, and the violence that will end us. And perhaps, just perhaps, we were watching the memory of another world, long gone, reminding us that nothing, no planet, no civilization, no life, is exempt from the law of shattering. What if the fragment drifting before us is not only matter, not only ice and dust, but memory? What if 3I/Atlas is a shard of a world that once held oceans, skies, and the breath of life? To look at its fragile body through a telescope is to stand on the shoreline of imagination, staring into waves that carry echoes from across the galaxy. We do not hear voices, we do not see ruins, but the silence itself presses against us, whispering, "This could have been a home." Consider how we look at Earth from above. From orbit, continents spread like veins, oceans glimmer, clouds coil into storms. To a distant observer, Earth itself is only a dot, a pale flicker. They would not see our cities, they would not know our stories, they would see only light, shadow, and motion. And yet, within that light are civilizations, histories, hopes, and fears. If Earth were broken tomorrow, what would endure? Perhaps only fragments like 3I/Atlas, brittle shards stripped of context, drifting through the dark. Another species might one day see those fragments and wonder, what echoes hide here? What shores once framed the sky above this dust? Science tells us that comets and asteroids are archives. They preserve chemistry from times and places unreachable by us. Some carry amino acids, molecules that hint at the origins of life. Others hold isotopic signatures that reveal the fires of long-dead stars. If this is true for our own comets, why not for shards from beyond? What if 3I/Atlas carried not only the dust of collisions, but the fingerprints of biology? Imagine the unbearable weight of that discovery. Proof that life once breathed upon a world that no longer exists, erased by violence. A world whose only memorial is a drifting, dying fragment. There is something profoundly human in the way we project stories onto silence. Looking at 3I/Atlas, we imagine alien shores, waves against rock, skies painted with unfamiliar constellations, perhaps even minds that looked up at their heavens with the same awe and dread we feel. Did they wonder if they were alone? Did they write myths of the stars, only to be silenced by the crushing inevitability of physics? Or was their world empty, life never sparked, the shard carrying only sterile dust? We do not know. We cannot know. Yet we are compelled to imagine, because imagination is how we bear the unbearable truth of destruction. If worlds are born and broken everywhere, then so too must dreams be born and broken everywhere. Our own history is fragile proof. Civilizations rise, build monuments, carve their beliefs into stone, and yet even stone crumbles. Libraries turn to ash, languages vanish. Entire peoples are reduced to fragments of pottery unearthed by strangers centuries later. If this is what happens on a single planet, what of galaxies? What of entire worlds, erased not by neglect, but by cataclysm? Perhaps fragments like 3Y/Atlas are the cosmic equivalent of pottery shards, broken pieces of civilizations whose full stories are forever gone. Imagine walking along a beach after a storm. You find fragments of glass, smooth and unrecognizable. You wonder what vessel they once belonged to, who held it, what liquid it carried. The glass will never tell you. It cannot. Yet, in its silence, it forces you to imagine the hands, the faces, the stories. So too with 3I/Atlas. It is glass smoothed by eternity, a fragment stripped of context, a shard without a vessel. But in its silence, it forces us to imagine. What world did this belong to, and what was lost when that world was torn apart? There is a haunting possibility that 3I/Atlas is not unique, that thousands of such fragments drift unnoticed, survivors of countless planetary deaths. Most never enter our sight, most never cross the narrow beam of our telescopes. They wander unseen, their echoes unheard. Yet every so often, one passes close enough, and for a brief moment, it becomes a mirror, not just of itself, but of us. In its fragility, we see our own fragility. In its silence, we hear our own potential silence. In its drifting, we glimpse our own future, cast adrift when Earth is gone. Some scientists resist such speculation. They say it is enough to know the chemistry, the orbit, the disintegration, but science itself was born from speculation, from the refusal to accept silence without a story, the shattered world. Theory is not a fantasy, it is a mirror held up to the violence we already know shapes planets. If Earth could be destroyed, why not others? If fragments drift here, why not fragments of alien worlds? To imagine alien shores is not to abandon science. It is to follow its logic to its most unsettling conclusion. Perhaps the shard we saw disintegrate was nothing more than ice. Perhaps it held no oceans, no cities, no memories. But the possibility remains, and it is that possibility that grips the mind. To imagine that within the dust of 3I/Atlas lies the chemical trace of an ocean long gone, or the mineral scar of a continent erased, is to confront the fragility of everything. We are used to thinking of extinction as the loss of species, but what of planetary extinction? What of worlds themselves ceasing to be? What echoes remain then, except shards drifting in silence? And so, as we watch 3I/Atlas dissolve, we were not only watching ice, we were watching a question burn before us. A question without answer, but with infinite weight. What if this is a piece of a dead planet? What if this is the last whisper of alien shores, carried across eternity to remind us that nothing is safe, nothing is permanent, nothing lasts forever? And if that is true, then the only thing left to us is this: to look, to wonder, to imagine. For in imagining, we keep alive the possibility that even in silence, echoes endure. Since the beginning of memory, humanity has looked upward and imagined the sky breaking. Myths across cultures are threaded with visions of worlds torn apart, heavens divided, and fragments falling as omens. Perhaps these stories were not only the poetry of fear, but echoes of a deeper truth, that the universe itself is stitched together by violence, and our ancestors sensed it long before telescopes confirmed it. When we speak of the shattered world theory, we are not merely imagining the death of planets. We are returning to an ancient idea, that creation always bears the scars of destruction. In Babylonian myth, the god Marduk slays Tiamat, the dragon of chaos, and from her broken body fashions the heavens. In Norse cosmology, the giant Ymir is killed, and from his dismembered remains the world is formed. His skull the sky, his bones the mountains, his blood the seas. In Hindu traditions, the cosmic being Purusha is sacrificed, his body divided to form all existence. These myths are not gentle stories of creation. They are tales of rupture, of tearing apart, of bodies broken so that new life might emerge. The world itself, they suggest, is not born whole, it is born shattered. What are myths if not memory? Not literal memory, perhaps, but a deep intuition that permanence is an illusion. Our ancestors lived beneath skies filled with falling stars, streaks of fire, mysterious fragments burning as they entered the atmosphere. They did not know the language of astrophysics, but they knew the feeling of fragility. They sensed that above them stretched a realm, not only of light, but of rupture. Their myths of broken gods and divided heavens were their way of naming the violence they saw and the violence they feared. Consider the Greek story of Phaethon, son of the sun, who lost control of his father's chariot and scorched the earth before being struck down by Zeus. The myth speaks of catastrophe, fire from the heavens, fragments of destruction falling upon the earth. Some scholars suggest it may be a memory of a cometary impact, preserved in symbolic form. The Maya told of suns that were destroyed and remade, cycles of worlds ending in fire, flood, or darkness. In China, legend spoke of the goddess Nuwa repairing the broken sky with stones of many colors after catastrophe cracked the heavens. Again and again, the human imagination returns to the idea of a sky that can break, of a world that can shatter. Is it coincidence that myths across cultures speak of cosmic rupture? Or are these stories fragments themselves, echoes of impacts witnessed by ancient peoples, transmuted into legend? We know now that Earth bears the scars of collisions, craters vast and deep, evidence of impacts that altered climates, ended eras, and reset the course of evolution. The Chicxulub impact, 65 million years ago, ended the reign of the dinosaurs and cleared the way for mammals, and eventually, for us. If such events shaped our history, why would they not shape our myths? Perhaps we carry in our stories the faint memory of skies that once rained fire. But myths do more than preserve memory. They reveal psychology. We tell stories of broken worlds because we sense, in our bones, that breaking is inevitable. To imagine a shattered sky is to externalize our own fear of mortality. Just as the body breaks, so too can the world. Myths become rehearsal for the unthinkable, preparing us to face the truth that permanence is a dream. In this sense, the shattered world theory is not new at all. It is a scientific echo of what myth has always told us, that nothing is immune to fracture. What then does 3I/Atlas mean in this context? To scientists, it is an interstellar comet. To poets, it is a ghost. But to the deep human psyche, it is a myth come alive. A fragment wandering across the sky is the very image of the stories we have told for millennia. Stones falling from broken heavens, shards cast across the void. When we speculate that it may be a piece of a dead planet, we are not inventing something new. We are stepping into an ancient narrative, one older than history, one whispered by firelight long before telescopes. Myths of shattered worlds also carry warnings. They tell us that creation and destruction are inseparable, that hubris brings downfall, that nothing built is safe forever. They remind us that civilizations, like worlds, can crumble. The Tower of Babel fell. Atlantis sank beneath the waves. Cities were cursed, kingdoms undone, heavens broken. In these tales, destruction is not random. It is the law. It is the balance. The myth of the shattered world is not only cosmic, it is human. It is about us. Science and myth, then, are not so far apart. Science tells us that planets collide, that fragments drift, that destruction is universal. Myth tells us the same, but in the language of gods and symbols. Both point to the same truth. Shattering is the foundation of being. Perhaps that is why 3I/Atlas captures us so completely. It is not only a scientific anomaly, it is a symbol that resonates with the oldest stories we carry. It is myth made visible, myth burning in the night sky. Imagine telling an ancient poet that one day we would confirm their fears, that indeed the sky does break, that worlds are shattered, that fragments wander endlessly. They might not be surprised. They might simply nod and say, "We already knew." For what is a myth, if not a way of holding truth before truth can be measured? And so, as we trace the trajectory of a fragile shard across the heavens, we are not only astronomers, we are myth makers. We are inheritors of stories whispered in caves, temples, and firesides. Stories that warned us that the heavens are fragile, the shattered world. Theory is not just science. It is myth reborn in the language of telescopes. It is the ancient intuition made visible. It is the same truth, told anew, that every world, every sky, every civilization carries within it the seeds of its own shattering. Perhaps this is why the sight of 3I/Atlas unsettled us so deeply. On the surface, it was only a comet fragment, but beneath it touched something older, something primal. It reminded us of the stories we have always told, the fears we have always carried, the truths we have always whispered. It reminded us that myths are not dead, they are living, waiting, echoing. And when a shard drifts across the sky, myth and science meet, and together they tell us the same thing. Nothing lasts forever. What happens to a world when it breaks? Its oceans boil away, its mountains shatter, its skies scatter into nothingness. But its fragments do not simply vanish. They drift. They wander into the endless gulf, carrying the memory of their world across light years. To look upon 3I/Atlas is to realize this. Interstellar space is not empty. It is littered with survivors of annihilation. Every shard that slips through our telescopes is not only a visitor, it is a messenger from a graveyard. Between stars lies a silence so deep it seems eternal. Light itself takes centuries to cross these gulfs, and yet fragments endure. A single shard, no larger than a mountain, may travel for millions of years, crossing the invisible borders between systems, brushing past suns that barely notice. In its silence, it carries a record, the chemistry of its birth, the scars of collisions, the erosion of endless radiation. It is a traveler without a destination, a wanderer with no home. This is the true anatomy of interstellar drift, the afterlife of worlds. We often imagine the void as clean, as if the spaces between stars are untouched. But astrophysics tells us otherwise. Every system throws fragments outward. Giant planets fling asteroids into exile. Collisions scatter dust into infinity. Supernovae hurl debris at unimaginable speed. Over time, the void becomes a sea of fragments, thinly spread but endless. 3I/Atlas was one such fragment, a grain adrift in an ocean so vast that chance itself had to bend for it to cross our skies. How many others wander unseen? How many shards have passed within a hair's breadth of us, invisible, silent, never noticed? The drift between stars is slow, almost cruelly so. Shards do not fly with purpose. They are exiles, condemned to journeys that outlast civilizations, outlast stars, outlast memory. Imagine a fragment leaving its parent world in fire, hurled outward by collision. Imagine it drifting for 1,000,000 years, then 1,000,000,000. Its surface scarred by cosmic rays, its chemistry altered by nothing but silence. Perhaps it brushes through nebulae, collecting faint veils of gas. Perhaps it skirts the edge of systems, glimpsing suns it will never orbit. Its journey is endless. It will not return. Its story is forward only, a pilgrimage of ruin. And yet, these fragments are not meaningless. They are archives. A shard like 3I/Atlas is a page torn from a book we cannot read. Within its dust lie isotopes forged in the fires of stars, minerals shaped by pressure, molecules that speak of temperatures and atmospheres long gone. If once it belonged to a living world, then within it may be fossilized whispers, salts from oceans, clays from riverbeds, organics shaped by biology. These traces drift with it, carried faithfully through the abyss. Every shard is a silent historian, preserving what the cosmos has erased. Think of Earth. If catastrophe shattered our planet, what fragments would drift into space? Some would be stone, some ice, some metal, but others would carry fossils, ruins, even the traces of our technology. Perhaps a circuit board fused into glass by fire, perhaps fragments of steel towers embedded in rock. To an alien telescope, they would look like comets, asteroids, dust. They would not know. They could not know. They would see only fragments, and yet, if they looked closely enough, if they asked the right questions, they might glimpse the echoes of a world that once breathed. They might see us, in ruins, The drift between stars is therefore more than mechanics. It is memory disguised as dust. To study 3I/Atlas is to confront the idea that memory survives even when worlds do not, or not memory as we understand it. No stories, no voices, no language, but memory written in matter itself. Rocks remember heat. Ices remember cold. Dust remembers violence. These fragments are books without words, and yet their silence speaks if we dare to listen. The tragedy is that we often cannot. By the time we see them, they are already disintegrating, their pages scattering before our eyes. But what of the emotional weight of drift? Imagine civilizations on other worlds, staring upward as catastrophe approached. Imagine them watching their skies fracture, their oceans boil, their mountains shatter. Imagine their last thoughts as fragments of their world were hurled into exile. Did they know the pieces of their home would wander forever, carrying a silent echo across the galaxy? Did they hope that someone, somewhere, would one day see those shards and understand? If so, then every fragment is not only matter, it is grief. It is mourning, drifting endlessly, hoping to be seen. And yet, in this grief, there is strange beauty. For even as worlds die, something of them endures. Not all is lost. The drift between stars is not annihilation, it is transformation. The shard no longer belongs to its parent world, but to the cosmos. It becomes a seed, a wanderer, a messenger. Perhaps in some future, a fragment will be captured by another system, drawn into orbit, colliding again, becoming part of a new planet. Perhaps fragments are recycled endlessly, worlds dying and giving birth to new ones through their brokenness. In this way, drift is not only exile, it is potential. Consider our own ancestors again, telling stories of stars falling from the sky. Perhaps their myths were closer to truth than they knew, for stars do not fall, but fragments do. They streak through skies, glowing as they die, each one a messenger of violence, each one a reminder that the heavens are not eternal. We too are fragments, drifting between birth and death, carrying memory in fragile bodies. In a sense, the drift between stars is not foreign, it is human. We feel it every time we look backward, remembering what is gone, or forward, imagining what will be lost. The silence of drift is what unsettles us most. There are no signals, no voices, no warnings, only fragments, wandering endlessly, saying nothing. We crave meaning, we search for stories, we imagine alien shores. But the shards themselves are mute. They do not intend to be understood. They do not care. They simply are. In that silence lies the greatest lesson. The universe does not preserve memory for us. If we want meaning, we must make it ourselves. If we want stories, we must tell them. The drift will not do it for us. And so, when 3I/Atlas crossed our skies, what we witnessed was not only a comet. We witnessed the silence of drift, the slow exile of a fragment that had traveled longer than life on Earth has existed. We saw a page from a book we cannot read, burning before us, scattering before our eyes. We saw the truth of interstellar space. Not empty, not clean, but filled with the ruins of worlds. And in that truth, we saw ourselves reflected. For one day, Earth too will shatter, and our fragments will drift. Our ruins will wander. Our memory will scatter into silence. And perhaps, in some distant system, another mind will look up at one of our shards and wonder, what world was this? What was lost? What echoes drift between the stars? What if, long before we pointed telescopes at 3I/Atlas, someone else was watching a sky break? What if civilizations once stood beneath their own heavens, staring upward as their world began to unravel? We imagine extinction as silence, but perhaps there were witnesses, eyes, minds, cultures, that watched as their planet fractured, knowing they were powerless against the violence unfolding above them. If 3I/Atlas is a shard of such a world, then it carries not only chemistry, not only geology, but the ghost of those final witnesses. Think of our own fragility. If Earth were to face its end, whether by collision, supernova, or internal catastrophe, would we not watch it unfold? We would track the firestorms, the rising seas, the fractured skies. We would record, we would transmit, we would cry out into the void, hoping someone, somewhere, would hear. Our fragments would scatter, carrying not just stone, but traces of our presence. Perhaps civilizations elsewhere have already lived this story. Perhaps their cries are lost, but their shards remain. Imagine a world with oceans and continents, cities and stories. Its people look upward as a rogue planet looms closer, drawn by the inevitable pull of gravity. They watch as tides rise unnaturally, as the crust quakes, as the heavens split with fire. They write, they pray, they fight, they mourn. And then the moment comes. Collision, rupture, annihilation. The world breaks. Most perish instantly, but the fragments endure. Among them, one shard is flung outward, carrying the memory of collapse. It drifts, silent, across the galaxy. Millions of years later, it enters our sky, and we call it 3/Atlas. How much of their grief clings to it still? It is difficult for us to imagine collapse on such scales. Civilizations end, yes. Empires fall, languages die, cultures vanish. But the world itself endures. To imagine a planet's destruction is to stretch our minds beyond comfort. And yet, this is what physics demands. Worlds collide, stars die, orbits decay. Nothing is permanent. If intelligence arises often in the galaxy, then intelligence must also often perish. Some perished through their own hand, perhaps. Others through indifference of nature, and some, perhaps most tragically, through collapse of their own world. In such cases, there were witnesses, minds that knew what was coming but could not prevent it. What would it mean to witness such an end? To stand upon a planet and see the sky torn open, the crust fracture, the oceans boil. What does the human heart do in the face of absolute annihilation? We would hope for survival, but hope would be futile. We would cling to meaning, but meaning would dissolve in fire. All that would remain would be fragments. If alien witnesses once endured this, then every shard drifting through space is not just debris, it is testimony. Not testimony in words, but testimony in presence. The very fact of its existence says, we were here, we saw, we ended. 3/Atlas invites us to project this story. We cannot know its origin, but its fragility, its disintegration, suggests trauma. It looks less like a body and more like remains. To call it a shard is to acknowledge that it once belonged to something greater. And what is a shard but proof of collapse? What is a shard but evidence that something once whole no longer is? In this way, 3/Atlas becomes a witness itself, carrying the silence of its parent world. It does not speak, but its silence is louder than any voice. It says, destruction happened. It says, nothing is safe. If alien civilizations once existed, then some of them must have known collapse in real time. Perhaps they tried to resist. Perhaps they built vast engines, hoping to move their world from danger. Perhaps they launched ships, carrying seeds of life into space. Perhaps they dug deep, hoping to survive underground. But physics is merciless. If a planet shatters, nothing endures. They would have known that, in the end, all their efforts would fail. And so, like us, they may have turned their eyes upward, witnessing the end with awe, horror, and despair. In that gaze, they joined us across time and space. For though we have not yet faced collapse, we know the feeling of fragility. We know what it means to sense that everything could end. This is the haunting power of the shattered world theory. It suggests that fragments like 3/Atlas are not merely geological, they are existential. They are monuments to endings witnessed. They are the ashes of worlds, carrying the silence of civilizations that watched their skies collapse. When we study them, we are not just studying rock. We are touching grief across light years. We are placing our hands upon the tombstones of the unknown. Think of our telescopes, catching faint light reflected from a fragment disintegrating. On the surface, we see only brightness curves, chemical traces, orbits. But beneath, there is another layer, one we cannot measure. The layer of imagination, of empathy, of projection. We cannot help but ask, who witnessed this? Who looked up at the same fragment, centuries or eons before, not as an outsider, but as a participant? Did they understand what was happening? Did they know their story was ending? Or did collapse come so suddenly that no one had time to speak, to remember, to mourn? Perhaps the witnesses are not individuals, but the world itself. Planets remember in their geology. Oceans remember in their chemistry. When collapse comes, the world is both victim and witness. The shards that drift afterward are the world's testimony. They carry its scars, its minerals, its isotopes. They say, "This is what I was. This is how I ended." In this sense, 3I/Atlas is not only matter, it is memory. It is a world speaking without words, carrying the silence of collapse into the ears of anyone willing to listen. We are drawn to this story because it could be ours. We too may one day be the witnesses of collapse. Perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not for millennia. But physics is inevitable. The sun will expand, collisions will occur, our atmosphere will strip away, Earth will end. And when it does, we will watch. We will be the witnesses of our own collapse. Perhaps we will record it, perhaps we will flee, perhaps we will fight. But in the end, we will join the countless others who have watched their worlds break. And our fragments will drift, carrying our silence, hoping someone, somewhere, will look upon them and wonder who we were. 3. I/Atlas, then, is a rehearsal. It is a fragment that teaches us how to think about endings. It forces us to confront the possibility that civilizations can vanish, leaving nothing but shards. It teaches us that being a witness does not prevent collapse. It only ensures memory, however faint. And perhaps that is all that matters. To witness is to leave a trace. To witness is to ensure that silence is not complete. Even if we cannot endure, our fragments may. Even if our voices vanish, our shards will drift. So, when we look at the fragile light of a comet fragment breaking apart, we are not only seeing dust, we are seeing the echo of collapse. We are seeing the testimony of worlds that once were. We are seeing ourselves, reflected in the silence of another. And in that silence, we hear the most haunting truth, that to exist is to be fragile, to endure is to witness, and to witness is to leave behind fragments for others to find. When we look at 3I/Atlas, we do not only see the memory of another world, we see ourselves. A fragment drifting through interstellar darkness is not just an alien story. It is a mirror, reflecting what will one day be our own fate. For if worlds can shatter, then so too can Earth. And in that realization lies a truth too heavy to ignore. The shattered world theory is not only about distant planets. It is about us, here and now. Earth feels eternal. We walk across continents shaped over eons. We look at oceans that seem bottomless. We breathe air that feels infinite. To our senses, the planet is immovable, indestructible. But science tells us otherwise. Earth is fragile. Its balance is precarious. Its survival is temporary. Already we know of near misses, asteroids that grazed past us, impacts that scarred our crust, eruptions that nearly ended life. Already we know that the sun will one day expand, burning away our oceans. Already we know that the clock is ticking. And yet, we live as though collapse could never reach us. Fragments like 3I/Atlas remind us otherwise. They tell us that no world is safe, no matter how solid it feels. What happened elsewhere can happen here. Perhaps not tomorrow, perhaps not in our lifetimes, but certainly, inevitably, one day. The Earth we know, with its forests, rivers, and cities, will not last. It will be shattered, broken, reduced to fragments drifting through space. And just as we now look upon 3I/Atlas and wonder, so too will another species in some distant future look upon our fragments and ask, what was Earth? Who lived there? What was lost? But the mirror does not only reflect physical collapse, it reflects the fragility of our civilizations. Long before Earth itself is shattered, we may shatter ourselves. Nuclear fire, climate collapse, pandemics, the slow erosion of ecosystems. These are the collisions we create for ourselves. If we do not fall to physics, we may fall to our own hands. And in either case, the result is the same. Fragments. Fragments of cities, fragments of cultures, fragments of memory. What survives may not be the whole, but shards scattered across the ruins. We may not need an asteroid to mirror 3I/Atlas. We may become our own shattered world. This is the haunting symmetry. To see a fragment of another world is to glimpse not only alien collapse, but human fragility. The cosmos does not separate us from others. It unites us in destruction. Every shattered planet reflects the possibility of our own. Every fragment is a mirror of what we may become. In this sense, 3I/Atlas is not foreign at all. It is intimate. It is us before our time. Consider the parallels. a world breaks, fragments drift, civilizations are erased, memory is reduced to dust. How different is that from our own history? Cities burn, libraries vanish, languages die, cultures dissolve. Memory becomes fragments, scattered through time. Archaeologists dig through the dust, piecing together shards of pottery, ruins of stone, fragments of story. We are already living the shattered world theory on a smaller scale. What happens to civilizations has already foreshadowed what will happen to planets. The destruction of Earth itself will only magnify the pattern we already know. To look at 3I/Atlas is therefore to hold a mirror. We see in its fragility our own. We see in its silence our potential silence. We see in its drift our own inevitable drift. This is why it unsettles us. It is not only about the alien, it is about the human. It is about the knowledge that we too are temporary. We too will shatter. We too will leave only fragments behind. And yet, the mirror is not only despair, it is also clarity. For to know fragility is to know value. If we accept that Earth is temporary, that our civilizations are impermanent, then every moment becomes precious. The mirror tells us that permanence is an illusion, but it also tells us that impermanence is meaning. The fact that we will be fragments makes our present whole. The fact that we will drift makes our roots valuable. The fact that we will be lost makes our presence luminous. In the mirror of 3I/Atlas, we see not only doom, but also urgency. The urgency to live, to preserve, to remember. There is another mirror too. Perhaps one day our fragments will drift to another system. Perhaps alien eyes will look upon them and wonder. Perhaps they will speculate about Earth, as we speculate about 3I/Atlas. They will not know us. They will not hear our voices. They will see only dust, only stone, only chemistry. But perhaps, in their imagination, they will reconstruct something of who we were. Perhaps they will imagine oceans, forests, skies. Perhaps they will imagine civilizations. And perhaps, just perhaps, they will not be wrong. In that act of imagination, our fragments will live again. This is the paradox of mirrors. They reflect us, but they also project us. They show us not only who we are, but who others may believe we were. We look at 3I/Atlas and imagine alien shores. One day, someone will look at Earth's fragments and imagine human shores. In that mutual projection, meaning survives. Even if nothing physical endures, imagination ensures continuity. The mirror is both loss and remembrance. But for now, the mirror warns us. It warns us of arrogance, of thinking ourselves immune to collapse. It warns us of blindness, of ignoring the fragility of our own systems. It warns us of silence, of failing to preserve memory before it is scattered. The shattered world theory is not only cosmology, it is ethics. It demands that we confront our fragility and choose how we will live knowing the end will come. Will we squander our time, or will we use it to create fragments worth remembering? Will our shards tell of wisdom or of folly? In this way, 3I/Atlas is not only a fragment, it is a mirror. It is the cosmos holding up a reflection, saying, "This is you. This is what you will become. This is the truth you cannot escape." And though the reflection is dark, though it shows us our end, it also shows us our value. For mirrors are not only about endings, they are about recognition. And in recognizing ourselves in the fragments of another world, we may finally see the fragile beauty of our own. Every fragment is an archive. Every shard that drifts through the darkness is a page torn from a book we can no longer read. 3I/Atlas was such a page, brittle, fragile, disintegrating before our eyes, yet carrying within it the silent memory of everything it once belonged to. It is not only debris, it is testimony. It is not only dust, it is record. The universe keeps no journals, no libraries, no monuments. It keeps only fragments. And in those fragments lies the archive of silence. What does silence preserve? Not words, not voices, not the warmth of life. Silence preserves scars. The minerals of a planet record its pressures and temperatures. The isotopes of a fragment record the fires of the stars that birthed them. The ices record the cold from which they froze. These are facts without meaning, data without narrative. And yet, when we study them, we bring them to life. We imagine the worlds they once belonged to. We imagine oceans, skies, civilizations. We imagine grief, collapse, memory. In doing so, we turn silence into story. But the archive itself remains mute. It does not speak. It does not care. It simply exists, waiting for someone to ask. Think of our own archives. Libraries, museums, databanks. We build them to preserve memory against time, but fire destroys them. Floods erase them. Wars scatter them. How much of our history is already gone, reduced to ash, to fragments too small to piece together? If this is true on a single planet, how much more is it true across the cosmos? The archive of silence is vast beyond measure. For every world destroyed, fragments drift. For every civilization erased, dust remains. Most of it we will never see. Most of it will never be read. It is an archive without librarians, without organization, without intention. It is a library written by accident, scattered by violence, unread by anyone. And yet, sometimes we glimpse a page, a shard drifts into our system, and for a brief moment we see the archive. 3. I/Atlas was one such glimpse. Oumuamua was another. There will be more. Each one is a reminder that the silence is not empty. It is filled with records we cannot fully decipher. The cosmos is an archive of destruction, and we are only beginning to read its margins. But what does it mean to call it an archive? Archives imply memory, but also loss. For every record preserved, countless others are gone. The archive of silence is incomplete, fragmented, partial. It tells us only enough to haunt us, never enough to satisfy us. A single shard says, "There was once a world, but what world? What sky? What people, if any?" The archive does not answer. It preserves the fact of existence, but not the story of it. It is a library of beginnings without endings, of titles without chapters. To read it is to feel the weight of what is missing. And perhaps that is the point. Perhaps the archive of silence is not meant to tell us everything. Perhaps it is meant to remind us of fragility, to remind us that even silence carries memory, to remind us that destruction is never absolute, that something always endures, even if it is only dust. In this way, the archive is both cruel and merciful. Cruel because it erases stories we long to know. Merciful because it leaves traces, however faint, to prove they once existed. If Earth were shattered, what would its archive be? Fragments of stone carrying isotopes of our atmosphere. Dust containing traces of life's chemistry. Perhaps even relics of our presence. Metals refined, plastics fossilized, circuits fused into glass. These would drift, silent, across the galaxy. To those who found them, they would look like comets, asteroids, debris. Only with imagination would they become more. Only with empathy would they be read as story. Our archive would be silent, but it would exist. And perhaps that is the best we can hope for. That silence itself becomes testimony. The archive of silence is also a mirror of time. It tells us that nothing is preserved forever. Even fragments erode. Cosmic rays strip away ices. Collisions grind shards into dust. Gravity swallows them into stars. Over billions of years, even the archive will thin, fade, vanish. Silence erases even silence. The library of the cosmos is temporary. It is an archive written on sand, vulnerable to the tides of eternity. This truth is unsettling. It means that not only do worlds die, but even their ruins are temporary. Memory itself will one day be gone. And yet, until that final erasure, fragments endure, drifting as fragile testimonies of what once was. What does it mean for us to be readers of this archive? It means that we carry a responsibility to look at a shard and recognize it as story, to see silence and hear meaning, to treat every fragment not as debris, but as message. We may never know its origin, its context, its full truth, but we can honor it by acknowledging that it once belonged to something whole, something alive, something gone. To read the archive of silence is to practice humility. It is to accept that most of the story is missing, but to value the fragment anyway. And so, 3I/Atlas becomes not only a comet fragment, but a page from the archive. Its disintegration was not only an astronomical event, it was a glimpse into the silent library of the cosmos. As it fell apart, it reminded us that silence is not emptiness, but memory, that fragments are not meaningless, but archives, and that the cosmos, though merciless, preserves traces of what it destroys. We are left with no answers, only questions. But perhaps questions are the point. Perhaps questions are the way we participate in the archive, adding our own voices to its silence. For what is an archive without readers? What is silence without someone to hear it? In looking at 3i/Atlas, we gave it meaning. We turned its dust into memory, its fragility into testimony, its silence into story. We cannot know if anyone else will ever read our fragments when Earth is gone, but we can know this. We read theirs. We bore witness. We looked into the silence and refused to see only emptiness. We saw story. We saw grief. We saw ourselves. The story of 3i/Atlas ends as it began, in silence. It arrived from the abyss, fragile and strange, wandered briefly across our sky, and then disintegrated before us. Yet its brief passage left behind a question that lingers like a ghost. What if it was a piece of a dead planet? What if the cosmos is filled not with endless promise, but with endless ruins? This is the shattered world theory, that what we see as comets, asteroids, fragments are not only geological leftovers, but memorials. They are the bones of worlds that once were, drifting endlessly, carrying the silence of collapse. To accept this theory is to accept that destruction is the law of the cosmos. Stars are born in violence, live in fire, and die in collapse. Planets form in collisions, endure in fragile balance, and end in rupture. Life itself is temporary, arising in brief windows of stability before being erased by catastrophe. The cosmos is not a sanctuary, it is a battlefield. And yet, within that battlefield, fragments endure, silence endures, testimony endures. The shattered world theory tells us that the universe is not empty. It is filled with archives of destruction, drifting quietly, waiting to be read. But what does it mean for us? It means that Earth is not exempt. Our planet feels permanent, but it is not. Already we know that it was born from collision, that it bears scars of impacts, that it has faced near extinction many times. Already we know that its future is finite, that one day by our own hands or by the hands of physics, it will shatter. And when it does, our fragments will drift. Our mountains, our oceans, our cities, our stories, they will all be reduced to shards wandering in silence. Earth, too, will join the archive of shattered worlds. This truth is haunting, but it is also clarifying. For if nothing lasts, then everything matters. If permanence is impossible, then presence is precious. The shattered world theory strips us of illusions, but it gives us meaning. It tells us that every moment is fragile, every civilization temporary, every life irreplaceable. It tells us that the beauty of existence lies not in its permanence, but in its impermanence. To live is to be temporary. To create is to be fragile. To endure is to leave behind fragments that may or may not be remembered. But to exist at all, even briefly, is miracle enough. The final question, then, is this: what fragments will we leave? If another species, millions of years from now, looks upon the remnants of Earth, what will they see? Will they find only stone and dust, chemistry without story? Or will they imagine oceans, forests, skies, civilizations? Will they sense in our fragments the echo of humanity? Will they imagine us as we imagine 3i/Atlas, projecting onto silence the story of shores and cities lost? If so, then perhaps we will not be entirely gone. Perhaps meaning will survive in imagination, carried forward by others, as we carried it forward when we looked upon a fragment drifting through our sky. This is the strange hope hidden in the shattered world theory. It does not promise survival, it does not promise safety. It promises only this: that nothing is wasted. That even in destruction, something endures. That fragments carry silence, and silence carries memory. That the cosmos, though merciless, is never empty. Every shard is testimony. Every fragment is witness. Every silence is archive. And in those archives lies the truth of existence. That to be is to be fragile, to endure is to break, and to break is to leave behind a trace. And so, the story closes. Not with triumph, not with despair, but with reflection. We looked upon a fragment and we saw more than dust. We saw ourselves. We saw our future. We saw the truth that all worlds, all civilizations, all lives are temporary. We saw that nothing lasts forever. And yet, we saw that even in silence, even in fragments, something remains. The shattered world theory is not only about 3i/Atlas, it is about us. It is about the fragile beauty of being alive in a universe that does not care, yet still leaves behind traces of what it destroys. As the last light of 3I/Atlas fades into the void, we are left with silence. But silence is not emptiness, it is memory, waiting to be heard. And if we listen closely, we can hear the echo of shattered worlds whispering through the fragments that drift between the stars. They tell us that nothing lasts. They tell us that everything ends. But they also tell us this, that to exist, even briefly, is enough. That every fragment is proof. That every silence is testimony. That every world, no matter how broken, was once whole, once alive, once real. The shattered world theory does not give us comfort. It gives us truth. And in that truth lies a beauty deeper than comfort. The beauty of knowing that even in endings, there is meaning. Even in silence, there is story. Even in fragments, there is remembrance. And perhaps in the end, that is all we need. To know that when our world shatters, when our fragments drift, we too will join the archive of silence, leaving behind a whisper that says, "We were here, we existed, we mattered," and that, even in the vast indifference of the cosmos, is enough.